Hello everyone, I welcome Michael Noel, who will be speaking about you're doing something wrong in IT security. Hey Michael, welcome to the show. I hope you had a good morning coffee before you start off the day.
Yeah, it's early morning for me here, 7 a.m., but glad to be on.
Sure, Michael, the stage is all yours. Let's hear you out.
All right, sounds great. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're coming at from around the world here. Um, I'd like to get started with a quick intro. If you haven't attended any of my sessions before, my name is Michael Noel, and I work for a Bay Area consulting company. I've been working there for 20 years. I'm a partner within the company, and we do a lot of work in setting up people's Azure infrastructure, Office 365. Over the years, I've also been able to present around the world on various topics. In fact, if you look at the background of this slide here, that's a Power BI that I put together that actually uh, illustrates all the different speaking engagements around the world that I've been able to speak at over the past 15 years or so. So the bigger circles indicate when there's more events at a different location and that type of thing. So been around quite a bit, not so much for the past year and a half, of course, but I do potentially have some travel to some conferences in Europe later this fall, assuming that does happen. But so, unprecedented times and all of that. I hope everybody's keeping safe and what have you. But I do plan on getting back to speaking at some point. I have spoken across India, at multiple places. I've been to Chennai, Pune, Delhi, Bangalore. So great country. I do hope to again get back at some point soon. So I do also, I've written some books over the years, primarily books in the Unleashed series. So SharePoint Unleashed was kind of a big one. I did a few other ones as well too. So I haven't done books recently because, to be completely honest with you, the nature of the business has changed. Microsoft changes their products every few weeks or so. So it's not like there used to be where you'd have a release of SharePoint and then it would be the same everything within that version of SharePoint for the next 3 years. So in any case, still doing work within the industry, just not as much in terms of the large books and things like that. So, okay. So really what this session is about, this session is kind of goes along with a lot of the work that I've been doing recently in cybersecurity. And IT security itself has been something that I've been involved with over the years, actually over 25 years or so since I started working within IT security. But one of the things I noticed within the last couple of years is the threats that are out there have drastically changed, and the tool sets that are out there have changed as well too. So that's really essentially why I came up with this session. Is that I saw a lot of clients and talked to a lot of people who really were doing their IT security in the wrong way. And so I wanted to, talk through first off an understanding of what the problem was, why modern hackers have kind of changed what they're doing, and then the latter half of the presentation, I'll be focusing on things that you can do to improve your security. So a few of the things that we see that's really common nowadays among hackers is there's this concept of phishing, phishing with a P. The idea of phishing is that you're trying to get someone to give up their credentials, and there's various ways in which these hackers go about trying to do that. Spear phishing is a targeted attack on specific people. When phishing started, it used to be you just kind of randomly send mass email blasts out to people, but it became fairly easy to determine who was doing those kind of things. So because the email algorithms would see that there's a mass email going out to everybody and they would block it. So what happened is that the hackers realized that if they do a targeted attack on specific individuals within your organization, usually people that control the money, the finance people, or sometimes IT admins. So, and it's not that difficult to get that kind of information. To be honest, we publicize that type of information. If you've set up a LinkedIn profile that says I'm a senior IT admin at this organization, or I'm the director of finance at this organization, you're basically announcing to hackers that this is somebody that you want to go after. So, it becomes relatively straightforward to then target those people. And these are very sophisticated targets. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll actually target someone who's associated with that person, someone who has a trusted relationship with that person. And then once they get the credentials of that account, then they'll email from that trusted person to the target and attempt to get them to give up their credentials. And again, there's multiple approaches to that. It's not just credentials. We actually, it was actually interesting. Personally, someone even tried to retarget my own personal paycheck to some different bank account. This is a few years back. We've put additional safeguards in place to avoid that, but that would have been a little bit annoying. Unfortunately, I was able to stop it before it got too far along the path. But they did that by targeting finance people within our own company. So these kind of things, spear phishing attacks, can be extremely costly. If you get a hold of someone who's in finance and they start sending wire transfers, then you could have a really serious issue. But it's not just people within finance. It's executives. We see this happen with executives within the organization. And let's be completely honest, not all, many of you have worked with executives. These are very smart people on certain things, and they're not always very savvy when it comes to the IT side of things. So they rely on other people to help manage that. So when they get a prompt that says log in with your credentials, and it looks like it's a real login prompt that they get every day, they oftentimes will just give up their credentials. So spear phishing has become a major issue. At the same time that this is going on, the resources that these hackers have become much more significant. So a lot of the reasons for that is that there are states that are out there that sponsor attacks. And they have various reasons for doing that. They're trying to steal intellectual property to help build their own state enterprises, or sometimes they just literally want to create some chaos within different governments that are out there. So you have these state-sponsored attacks. You'll have entire buildings with cubicle farms of people just sitting around attempting to hack. Because they have those resources, it makes it a lot more likely for them to be able to do things, because they don't have to worry about living paycheck to paycheck. They're getting funds for this. These people are professionals in a sense that are essentially going after and attempting to hack people constantly. So when we've also gone is incidentally from the targets of these state-sponsored organizations being NGOs or military or things like that, we've gone from that to where essentially any organization on the web has become a target. Ransomware. We see ransomware showing up all the time now. Unfortunately, this is one of the primary ways in which organizations that, let's say, maybe don't have a state to back them up, this is how they make their money. And the ransomware attacks are essentially, they're pretty nefarious. The way that they work is they get a hold of an account, ideally some type of an admin account, like an IT admin account. And what they do is they then search and see every location that's out there, every file server, every system that person has access to. And they go out and run an algorithm that goes and encrypts all of that content, encrypts the content, and then essentially takes the key and holds the key hostage. And at that point, then what happens is the systems reboot. It goes into a screen that says, hey, your machine has been locked. The only way out of this is to pay up in some form of cryptocurrency, something like a Monero or Bitcoin or something. And if the organization doesn't pay up, they don't give them the key. Now, in some cases, there's actually been incidences where the organizations do pay up and they still don't get the key, or they paid up and the key is like single-threaded, and they're trying to decrypt everything, and it takes forever, and so they end up having to restore from backups and things like this. So most of the time, though, people don't bother paying up, but they do pay enough times where these organizations that do that, they have incentive to continue ransomware attacks. And again, we saw ransomware attacks initially on larger organizations that had more funding, but now we see them on small city governments. There were a few cities down in the state of Texas that had to completely shut down. All the police officers were writing paper tickets instead of using their electronic systems, because their entire IT network essentially was leveled to the ground with ransomware. Device theft. This has been around as long as I've been working in IT. People lose their laptops. Someone breaks the window of their car, steals the laptop from the back seat. Probably not a good idea to leave your laptop in the back seat of a car, but people do things like that. But what's interesting is that the sophistication has actually gotten of the way that these thieves work has actually gotten much worse in a sense. One of the things that we've started to see people do is they'll actually take a Bluetooth detector and go along through a parking, what you guys would call a car park, and they would test for if there's a Bluetooth signal emanating from what we call the trunk or the boot of the car. And if there is, then they break the window, flip the switch to get into the back, steal the laptop out of there. So they've gotten more sophisticated. It's not just about having the laptop in the back seat of the car. They'll actually seek out those types of Bluetooth signals. If you have a laptop that's in kind of a Bluetooth pairing mode, for example. And then if you have a device that's not encrypted, you're actually someone's I think someone else is not on mute. So if you guys can just check your mute status. I hear someone else in the background there. In any case, device theft is an issue. Oversharing of content. One of the things that I often get when we talk to especially smaller organizations is say, hey, listen, we trust our employees. We don't expect them to be stealing content or doing things like this. Well, one of the things to realize about the IT space is that the vast majority of intellectual property loss, somewhere around 90% of it, is not actually due to malicious where someone goes out and maliciously steals things or walks away with a thumb drive of all the information. Most of the time, it's actually done through what we call oversharing of that information. And that is basically when when someone takes a file or someone takes a database and they want to share it outside with somebody else, and let's say they create a link as opposed to sharing that with specific people. Well, there's an email chain, the link gets out there, it gets sent to the wrong person, that person clicks on the link, all of a sudden they have access to data that they probably shouldn't have had access to. There's other cases, especially within the cloud, where you have situations where there'll be a large database of information, and then it's stored up in AWS or Azure, and the proper security is not put on it. It's made public. And then suddenly someone just kind of stumbles across that information. That actually happened to the California Department of Motor Vehicles, where they had a database of some very sensitive information about motor vehicle owners and operators, and it was just put onto a public database, and it took a few months before people noticed, but someone finally figured it out. And at that point, whether or not it was accessed, I think it was just a reporter that found it, and then they notified them. They were able to lock it down, but they couldn't determine if other people had accessed it or not. So they had to then notify all those people that their information was potentially stolen. So oversharing is a big issue. While all this is going on, the way that we do passwords nowadays has really not changed much since the days of, let's say, the 1990s. And this is really unfortunate, because the reality is that, we're doing passwords wrong today. We're doing passwords wrong for multiple reasons, but one of the main ones is that passwords, it's the key to a good password is not even necessarily its length, how many, complexity it has, but how unique that password is. It needs to be a globally unique password. And the reason I say that is that, there are these dark web databases of 787 million, I think is the latest that I saw, hacked passwords that are just out there and are available for dictionary attacks. So basically what happens is that anytime someone gets hacked, the hackers get together, they grab those the passwords out of that they're able to get out of that hack, and they dump them up in these dark web databases. And the first thing that they do when they have access to be able to test things is they attempt to try all of those passwords. Well, humans being humans and not being good at remembering the way that we do passwords, they'll actually reuse passwords all the time. And I'm sure you've seen it. I'm sure it's happened. Family members that just use the same password for absolutely everything. Some of them have gotten better. It used to be that passwords were as simple as the name of their pet, or or the birth date of a family member or something like that. Now they're get a little more sophisticated. They put a capital letter in there. They throw a symbol at the end, or I'm sure you've seen the password with the P and then the ampersand and the dollar signs instead of the S's. Well, all of those passwords are in these dark web databases. And if a hacker is able to do a type of attack against those things, which there's multiple ways in which they can do that, the first thing that they will try is they'll try all 787 million of the passwords in those dark web databases. So, one of the things that I try to get organizations used to doing is to first off to move to a concept of passphrases. And the reason for that is that it ties back to human psyche and what humans are good at remembering. Humans are actually very good at remembering long sequences of words. So, for example, a passphrase. I put an example there: yellow birdseed hat pumpkin. As a human, you can kind of create a mnemonic in your head, and you can think of, okay, I've got yellow birdseed on a hat that's sitting on a pumpkin. I'm going to remember that a lot better than I'm going to remember, capital P, ampersand, blah, 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 L, 2QR, some of these longer and complex passwords. In fact, oftentimes you won't remember those things. So if there is a situation where you're using, a password on a regular basis, as opposed to using what we think of as a good password, use a passphrase, you're actually going to make it that much more difficult for a hacker to get in. Of course, it needs to be a globally unique passphrase. Even passphrases, some of them are in those dark web databases that are out there. So one of the things I recommend, there's some white hat ethical hacking websites like haveabeenpwned.com, where you can actually see if your password has been part of a database breach. I don't normally recommend entering in, especially not a current password, but you can check some of your older passwords. Or you can, if you're coming up with a new one, you can see if that combination is part of that. You can also incidentally enter your email address, and that'll tell you if your email address has been part of any of these hacks. Because one of the first things that happens after someone, the common scenario is, I've set up an account on a website, whatever it is. It's a social media site or even a business site. I create an account that's up there. I set the password to something that I can remember. Oftentimes it's the same. For people doing business, sometimes they'll use their business password because they think to themselves, well, I needed to create this account because of my work, so I'm going to I'm going to make the same password so that I can remember this. Well, that provider, that cloud provider, gets hacked. All the passwords get compromised, and the first thing they do is they check the email addresses, they check the passwords, and they go to try to log into Office 365 or whatever service that you're using that. And because the passwords are oftentimes the same, these hackers can be successful at gaining access to these things. So, we need to rethink the way that we're doing passwords. Incidentally, from an IT perspective, one of the biggest mistakes that people make nowadays is forcing their users to change their passwords often. And that may sound counterintuitive, but the reality is that if you have a unique long passphrase, it can remain viable for a very long period of time. sometimes even up to a sequence of years. Now, years might be pushing it a little bit. Most of the times we do recommendations about having changed passwords every 6 months or so. But I would say that having your users change their password more often than every 6 months is actually counterproductive because first off, everybody knows what the users do. They just sequence a number onto the end of it. Or, for the places that make them change every 3 months, they just change the season that's associated with their password. One of the most common passwords right now is summer 2021. That's one of the first things that hackers attempt to log in with users as, because people are changing their password, so they just change the password to whatever the season is because it's something that they can remember. So as IT admins, we need to get more sophisticated and start to think through things and basically implement better password management policies. And that could be also things like password management suites that are out there. Cache credentials. I'll tell you, I've worked with a lot of companies that do penetration tests. And one of the things that they'll always tell you is that the way that they gain access to systems, and 99% of the time, is via cached credentials. This is an extremely dangerous concept. Of course, it's very valuable. You want to be able to have cached credentials in case you're offline. Let's say you're on an airplane, you want to log into your laptop. Well, you need to have a cached copy of your password credentials that are there on that machine for that to work properly. But the risk is with cached credentials, if someone has local admin access to your system, they can then attempt to try to hack those credentials. And depending on how secure your system is and how many legacy protocols are set up on it, it may be actually very, very easy to do. There's some legacy LSASS store stuff on Windows laptops, for example, that make it very, very simple to determine the password if you have local admin access to that box. The reason why cached credentials can be extremely dangerous is, I'll give you a scenario that's actually very common. Let's say you have just a user, just Joe user. Joe user is just a simple user. He doesn't have access to a lot of data or information, but Joe needs to fix something on his laptop. He brings his laptop to the service desk, and at the service desk, you have Jane. She logs in. She's an IT admin. She fixes whatever she needs to fix on that machine, gives the laptop back. He walks away with that laptop, and Jane's cached credentials are sitting on that laptop. At some point, Joe's not a very IT savvy user. He falls for some kind of a phishing ploy, and someone is able to gain access to his system. It may not be immediately evident to him, but someone is now in there with local admin access. And one of the first things they do is they start to look for cached credentials. They realize very quickly that Joe's credentials don't do much, but they find Jane's credentials there. Jane just happens to be an IT admin. All of a sudden, they, especially if Jane was a domain admin, they now have access to every domain system from from Joe's laptop using Jane's cached credentials on that machine. So this can be extremely dangerous. And there's various approaches I'll talk about that you can do to try to avoid that. So, back in the early days of hacking, once you were able to hack into a system, that system was kind of the only system that was hacked. Most cases, you'd steal what you could from it, you move on. But nowadays, what happens is the hackers are much more patient. They'll gain access to the system, like I mentioned, Joe's system, and then they attempt to do what are called lateral attacks. So they attempt to go after other systems or go after other accounts. And or as well, they'll also leave vestiges of themselves, different back doors into systems all the time. One of the things we see, for example, there's something in Kerberos called a golden ticket attack. And what a golden ticket attack is it's a way of creating this Kerberos ticket that never expires. It's called a golden ticket. And that ticket then, even if you take away someone's access, you've realized that there was that Jane's account was hacked. You reset her credentials, you kick everything off. The golden ticket is still out there. The hacker then can use that ticket that they created to gain access to resources. So, you see those. There's actually tool sets. There's things like Mimikatz that are these tool sets that allow for this type of hacking. pen test companies will actually use those same toolkits to try to essentially break into other systems. But then the idea again is I'm moving from low privileged workstations to higher privileged workstations. You'll see that oftentimes that's what happens. You start with a really low one, you move on to, you go check everything that person was able to log into. You find some other systems that are out there. You get into those systems and you find out there's some cache credentials from a higher privileged account. You use that account to move on to the next one. Eventually, you get to, the keys to the kingdom. You get to the domain admin accounts. So, I mean, a lot of this is intimidating. It's a bit scary. So, one of the things I want to make sure that we understand is that we do have countermeasures for pretty much everything that we talked about here. And so I want to talk through a few of the tips and tricks, and then we'll take a look at some of the tools that Microsoft provides to help you with this. But one of the ideas that I think needs to be, this is an old idea. It's called defense in depth, designing around defense in depth. But the idea is that you never want to just have one layer of defense around your data. You want to put controls in place, multiple controls in place, physical controls, network level controls, host level controls, application, admin, because the idea is that, at some point there's going to be a breakdown in one of your layers of security. But if they can only get through one of those layers, they're not going to gain access to your data. So when you're designing your data model, make sure that you design around the concept of defense in depth. I talked about the passwords. Passphrases, I think, is a great idea. Again, I know it's counterproductive, but does it make sense to force your users to change their password that often? I talked about 6 months. Honestly, even a year is acceptable, because if they're doing the best practices around their passwords, it doesn't matter necessarily that the password is aged. What matters is that it's globally unique. And natively, a Microsoft environment doesn't necessarily have the tools to be able to check global uniqueness of passwords, but there are password managers tools that will tell the users this is a bad password because it's part of your dark web database, or this is a bad password because it contains a common word that's used inside of it. So keep that in mind, and never reuse passwords. I know it's difficult to do. That's where the password management suites come into play. So, personally, for multiple years now, I think about 6-7 years, I've been using a password management tool, and it'll go through. I have it auto-generate my passwords. Most of the passwords I don't want to have to think about, but of course, there's the password into the tool that I do have to think about. You want to be do diligence around that password. But some of these, when I just create passwords on just random websites, I just have it auto generate a new password, 24 characters long, multiple. I'm not going to remember that, nor would I ever need to. The password manager handles that for me, and then that's used to auto populate those forms. It makes it a little bit easier to do this, but at the same time, if one of those databases is hacked, I don't need to worry about it, because my password was used only within that particular site. This is surprisingly, it's an issue that seems to come up all the time. Users are really bad at this, but basically it's the concept of double checking your hyperlinks before you actually click on them. And that's because when these hackers are doing phishing attacks, they try to make it look like you're getting a legitimate email and that you need to click on a link that goes legitimately to your bank or to some other thing. So, for example, in the screenshot that I put up there, this is an actual real one, that I got. It went to my junk mail, but I fished it out just to show, this is the link that it's going to. If I look at that, it's going to someplace. It's ziffit.com. It doesn't make any sense. That's obviously not JP Morgan Chase as a bank. So, make sure you're double checking your files. In fact, I'm paranoid enough as an IT security person that I very, very rarely click on links, any links in email. If I'm expecting something from my bank, I just open up a fresh browser and go straight to the bank and check to see if the notification is there as well. If it's not, then I know that that's some form of a phishing attempt. So, it's just gotten to that point where you can't trust any hyperlink that's in an email nowadays. Physical security, if this hasn't been as big of an issue over the past year and a half, but if you are going back into the office, one of the things it's surprising, and this is when you talk again to pen test companies, they always get in they always are able to bypass security through a concept of tailgating. And the idea of tailgating is if you time your approach just right and you come in behind someone with a badge, that person badges the door, and oftentimes they'll even hold the door and let you walk right in. Because people are trying to be naturally nice, and so they don't want to be realize, oh, that was a new employee, and I just I stopped them from coming inside. So depending on the policies, there may be different policies where you have to actually be vetted by a security guard. Or what I've seen in some of the bigger organizations is you have these kind of like metro or subway turnstile entryways where people walk along, and as they walk along, they scan their badge, and if it senses somebody else that's coming, it puts it blocks them, or it notifies security that's there. So some kind of physical way of doing that. Really high secure organizations have these things called man traps, where basically it only allows one person in at a time, and so yeah, and at the same time, make sure when you have your wireless network set up, that you're doing things like 802.1x, and you're also, the vast majority of organizations today, even when you get on the Wi-Fi, you still need to VPN in. So it's gone are the days where you would be on the internal network once you got in on Wi-Fi, because it's just way too easy for hackers to get in that way. By the way, another thing the pen test people do, if you are have a pen test that's ongoing and you just happen to see a thumb drive laying around the place, don't grab it, don't plug it in, because that's how they get in. The hackers, after they've tailgated, will drop thumb drives around an organization, and people think, oh, a free thumb drive, and they plug it in, and of course it immediately loads the virus payload onto their systems. From a device theft perspective, we talked about that. It's become vital that you enable full disk encryption. So things on Windows like a BitLocker, and there's various other ways of doing this. But basically, everything on that hard drive, except for a very small area that's used for the booting process, is encrypted via full disk encryption. And that way, if you do lose access to the system, you don't have to worry about people gaining access to the data that's on those machines. And that helps to have like MDM tools, mobile device management tools, that allow you to remotely wipe a system. So if something is compromised, then you can go in and wipe that system later on. Data loss prevention, DLP, this is a concept of restricting what happens to the data after it's been properly accessed. And that sounds a bit odd the way that I'm saying it, but if you think about it, we've gotten very good at controlling access to the data. It's you've got ACLs in place that say that only this user can access this. Go into SharePoint, you can say, oh, I'm only allowing this user to have access to these files, or this person has read access. But what we're not so good at doing is, after they've downloaded that file and they've taken a look at it, is stopping them from making another copy of that file, from printing out that. Maybe you don't want them to print it out. And so the concept of DLP is putting restrictions on the abilities to programmatically or to rapidly extract data from something. So maybe you just want them to be able to read a document or review that document, but you don't want them to share that document outside of the organization, or to copy and paste content within that document, because maybe it's something that's sensitive, and that's where DLP policies come into place to help you avoid the IP, intellectual property theft. But the number one thing that you can do to improve your security posture more than anything else is to enable multi-factor authentication. And that's because a lot of the stuff that we talked about, the phishing, the bad passwords, all of that stuff can be mitigated through the use of an additional factor other than just the username and password. So the idea with multi-factor is you're getting prompted for a 6-digit number in addition to username and password. So even if the user's properly entered in their username, their password, they're going to get prompted then for that number. Oftentimes, you probably have seen this. You may have it set up with your bank or other services where you get it via a text message. And that's better than nothing, of course. That's much better than nothing. However, it's actually not as secure as a lot of people realize, because there's a concept called SIM swapping, where a hacker will call up the mobile phone provider and convince the mobile phone provider that they are you and tell them that you have a new SIM that you want to switch your services over to. Once they do that, they get the code immediately. They have the username and password. Boom, boom, boom. They've gone in and they've cleared your bank account out or whatever it is that you have tied into SMS. So I do recommend, using things like an authenticator app. Microsoft has the Microsoft Authenticator, which is basically the same as the Google Authenticator app, or moving down the chain, things like hardware keys, biometrics, but even using all of these in combination at the same time. Microsoft has something called Windows Hello that can help you to kind of combine those things together. But then at least you've got to have you need to have the hardware key together with the biometrics, together with username and password. All of those things are working together to provide for multiple layers, and it becomes that much more difficult for someone to be able to hack into your system. All right, so while the industry has been kind of hit by all of these pressures and the hacks are getting worse and worse and worse, Microsoft has been working in the background and actually creating several different IT tools that can help improve and to fill a lot of those holes that we have that are out there. And I've kind of put these Microsoft tools in this in a structure. That relates to what's called the National Institute of Security. National Institute of Standards and Technologies, or the NIST frameworks. They have what's called their cybersecurity framework, and that's kind of puts different tools in various categories, tools that are able to identify users, protect systems, detect intrusions that are going on, respond to those, and then recover from them. Now, some of these tools work across multiple areas, so just keep in mind is that I've kind of dropped them into where they best fit or where they have their primary focus. But you'll see that Microsoft has a large number of tools, of which we'll be talking about here. But these kind of go across, they run the gamut, as we say, across the various areas of what you need to be focusing on from a cybersecurity perspective. Now let's start with one of my favorite. There's this tool called Microsoft Cloud App Security, or MCAS. You may hear it referred to as MCAS just because of its acronym. MCAS is what's called a CASB, or a Cloud Access Security Broker. In true Microsoft fashion, they've created their own acronym for another acronym that's out there. But if you hear someone talking about a CASB, the concept of that is that it's a tool that allows you to identify all the different cloud services that your end users may be using. So that'll tell you, when a user is uploading data to Dropbox, for example, and that may be the sign of a breach. Maybe they've stolen some data and they're pushing it up to Dropbox, or it'll identify when an end user has credentials on some service that's out there. Maybe they have credentials on T-Mobile, and T-Mobile, which happened recently, was hacked, and there was a bunch of information that was lost. So it can tell you, hey, that person had an account on this. You should maybe check with that user to make sure that their password was unique on that service. And I'll actually be showing in the demo a cloud app security environment, just to give you an idea of the power of this platform. But it is one of my favorite new Microsoft platforms in terms of the richness of these security alerts and information that's fed up to the console as an admin. And incidentally, there's a way where you can obfuscate the names of the users, where your admins don't actually see which user's doing things, but they can still be identified if they need to. So that way you can actually have your admins able to protect the environment without necessarily posing a privacy risk to your employees in terms of what they're accessing. Microsoft has a suite of tools that they call Microsoft 365 Defender. And these all had different names. So if you haven't looked at them recently, you may wonder, hey, what happened to MDATP, for example, Defender, which is now called Defender for Endpoint, but used to be called Defender Advanced Threat Protection. Well, they're all underneath this category of what's called, again, the Microsoft 365 Defender. And Microsoft 365 Defender really provides for these, cloud level security tools, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail here. But within the Azure space, there's what's called Azure Defender. So this focuses on cloud-based infrastructure. So you have Azure Defender for servers, Defender for IoT devices, and then Defender for SQL. Basically, those, if you create a SQL Server database in the cloud, it will alert you to things like SQL injection attacks or other types of things. So when you're creating things within the Azure Defender space, that they fall within will fall underneath the purview of Azure Defender within the Azure space. The tool called MDI, this used to be the tool called ATP, or just ATP, again, not to be confused with Defender ATP, but it's now called Microsoft Defender for Identity. This is one of my favorite on-premise tool sets that Microsoft provides. And it's actually, when I say on-premise, there's on-premise sensors, and then there's a cloud-based console. And the console actually integrates directly with MCAS. They used to be separate consoles. Now they work together. When you do have MDI out there, what happens is that you deploy these sensors to all your domain controllers, and it will look for behaviors that are associated with compromised systems. So it looks for the golden ticket attacks. It looks for someone trying to programmatically access all the passwords on a domain controller. So in environments where we've had MDI in place, and let's say there's a penetration test going on, we'll actually very quickly determine where the penetration tests are coming from. And in theory, we could, essentially lock them out, because it's very, you'll see these things, these alerts just immediately start flying up and saying, oh, there's some activity going on which is not normal and is typically associated with attacks. So I do recommend you deploy MDI to an on-prem environment and then feed that information up into the console, because what's great about it then is you can see a user screen within that console, and it shows not only the cloud things that they're working on as part of the MCAS components, but it'll also show logins from Active Directory, logins that are on-prem, all that information being fed up on the internal environment, and that information comes from these MDI sensors that are placed out there. Microsoft has a SIEM tool, Security Information Event Management Platform. I really, really like this. I've been using it for a couple of years now since it came out, deployed it at various clients. It's highly valuable when it gets deployed out there. And I'll give you one example about why this is such a good platform. Basically, the concept of a SIEM is you're taking a bunch of aggregate log information and storing it in a central location so that you can then search and view the security posture of, let's say, an individual user, or be able to be alerted on things that are happening, all from within all of the logs. So these logs are coming from your firewalls, logs are coming from your Active Directory domain controllers, logs are coming from all these other locations, and then they're just being centrally stored. In this case, they're being stored in an Azure Logs Analytics workspace as part of Azure Sentinel. So why it's really valuable, one of the clients that we had this on, we actually, Microsoft, if you remember, they had that very major incident where an Exchange on-prem server that was directly connected to the internet was able to get hacked without even having any credentials, just by getting into the login page. And once they were able to hack those systems, they could then do lateral attacks over to other systems. So extremely dangerous, because of course, a lot of people had these on-prem OWA environments that were connected directly to the internet. And at the same time, when Microsoft announced this, it was already 2 to 3 days after this was openly in the wild, and people were exploiting systems that were out there. So when Microsoft announced this, before they even had the patch, Azure Sentinel had updates built into it that would actually tell you if within the last 30 days, if there was anything within those logs that indicated that you might have been subject to one of these attacks. So, for example, the client that we had this in place, they were able to determine no, they weren't subject to any of those attacks, and they were able to know that because that was built into the Sentinel SIEM. And again, that came out before even Microsoft had the patch. So having something like that gives you visibility into these types of trends. We talked about the password best practices, and I talked about third party in terms of password management suites, and those are still useful. I'm not saying they aren't, but what's interesting is that Microsoft has a tool set called Azure AD Password Protection, which can provide you with capabilities above and beyond the native built-in password pieces that are within that. So what it does is it runs by agents on the domain controllers, and they actually will stop users from creating a password that's in a dark web database, or it'll stop them from putting common words in it, things that go beyond just kind of the built-in capabilities within like an AD environment itself. So it does require, of course, agents on every domain controllers. If you're missing one on a domain controller, you could have a blind spot. But just to note, I mean, again, Microsoft does have these tools available. There's a whole suite of tools within Azure AD called entitlement management. The idea of entitlement management is that you can create these access packages to give someone rights to somewhere within your Azure space, but only for a specific period of time, like you can have it expire after 30 days, and only through, for example, having to go through a workflow process. There's like where a manager can approve it, and those types of things. So Azure AD entitlement management is, the old school way of doing things. I've seen this before. It's happened to me. Oh, you need to do something in Azure? Here's your global admin rights. Please don't break anything. That's the old way of doing things. Entitlement management would be the preferred way of doing things moving forward. Within entitlement management, there's a component called PIM. The idea of PIM is then I can elevate myself only when I need to do a particular task. So in a perfect environment that's controlled by PIM, there's only ever maybe a couple permanent global admins, and those are ideally what we call break glass accounts. So they're used just in case PIM is down or there's an emergency. But everyone else that needs to gain access into the Azure environment has to go through a process of elevation, where they then elevate themselves for just a period of time, for example, like 2 hours or up to 12 hours, for example. I think that's the max in PIM. And then there's Microsoft has an on-prem component called MIM, of course, a new acronym. The interesting concept of MIM is that you can use the same concepts of PIM, but on an internal domain environment. It's a large solution. It runs on top of. I'm sorry, this is called PAM. MIM is the component that runs on Microsoft Identity Manager. PIM and PAM. Good old Microsoft again with all their acronyms. But PAM, the on-prem component, allows you to then elevate yourself as, let's say, a domain admin by going through a portal process. So you would have to say, I want to be a domain admin. It has to go through approval workflow. And then once you're given access, your account is added into that group. Now, even if you're not using PAM, there's a concept I want you to kind of understand in part of the slide, and that's the concept of what's called a bastion forest. And the bastion forest is a separate AD forest, and that separate AD forest is where your admin accounts lie. And there's a one-way trust. The bastion doesn't trust the corporate domain, but the corporate domain trusts bastion. And the idea is all my admin accounts being there, it isolates them, it keeps them highly secure. I can do things like control cache credentials, all of that stuff, and then they're added in as into the domain admins and corp when they need to via the PAM process. So I think the concept of the bastion forest is actually one that you'll probably see more and more often as organizations improve their security posture, because it can be dropped into an environment that already has an existing AD that's in there, and then you move your admin accounts over to the bastion environment to keep them isolated and keep them secure. Azure Information Protection. This is, I talked about DLP. Microsoft has DLP tools built into it, things like Azure RMS, Rights Management Services. These allow you to then control what happens to the data after it's been accessed. And it does that through the Microsoft Office client, enforcing things like not being able to print, or not being able to copy and paste content, or not being able to save as something different. So Azure Information Protection is the area within the Microsoft suite that does that. All right, I want to show you very quickly within a demo environment Microsoft Cloud App Security, just to give you an idea again of some of the Microsoft tools that are here. And again, this is a demo environment, so it's got some pre-canned stuff that's in here. You'll see Microsoft kind of pre-populated this, saying, "Hey, we've got this login of this user is coming in from what we've identified as a risky IP address." And it's identified as risky just because it's this person's using Tor. It's an anonymous proxy site to be able to gain access into it. So you'll see this triggered a specific type of alert. I can go in and investigate. Is this user? Do I need to worry about this user? What should I do? What kind of things? Let's take a look at what kind of activity the user has been doing recently. Is there something that I need to be concerned about? You can see again, this person's logging into SharePoint a lot. But again, this is one I talked about earlier. We've got an app that's out there that's, again, this is just pre-canned, so it doesn't even look like it ties in. Oh, here we go. Actually, this T-Mobile. So this one was breached. We can see more information about it here. Of course, Microsoft link's broken. But the idea is that you'll see a list of users that have been using this. In this case, nobody was using T-Mobile. Again, this is relatively recently created, so I think some of the stuff is not tied into it. Tor, infrequent country. You'll see there's a login. This will tell you, hey, this user logged in from Romania, and I know that person's not from Romania, so hey, maybe that's a problem. Let's go in and take a look at some of the things that the user has been doing. Maybe see if they needed to be. It looks like again this one is coming in from a location that I'm not. This is not a good thing. I need to take. I need to do some specific things on this user. I need to see what they gained access to, et cetera, et cetera. So again, in a real environment, you're going to see a lot more really useful information that's in here. But you get the idea is that this is feeding us the information. And I can also, by the way, then go out and take a look at different apps that are there, different users that are using the platform, how much data has been pushed across the platform, again, in an environment where this is you have a lot more of these applications, you're going to see a lot more information. But Microsoft also categorized these applications by what they call a score. So some of these have really, really low scores because they just don't have the information that Microsoft expects to see as part of, like, are they publicizing their security posture policy? There's a whole bunch of other things that are part of that. And you can, by the way, categorize these applications by category here. We've got different types of tools, security related tools, see which ones people are using, whether or not there's individual breaches on these individual tools, their privacy policy, if it's stated or not. Again, of course, Microsoft lists a lot of the Microsoft stuff as 10 here, but there are some non-Microsoft stuff that's in here as well that actually is fairly high up. Yeah, anyway, I could float around here forever. In environments, yeah, some of the AWS stuff is also listed pretty high as well too. So ServiceNow is that's also one of the ones that's rated pretty highly here. But I can create different policies. I can create, so you can see these are, the risky sign in. I can specify, I can modify some of these things. I can edit the policies. I can create new policies. If I want to be notified every time someone starts using a new app, I can do that. If I want to be alerted to mass downloads, malware detection, if there's malware that's going through things, maybe I want to turn this one on. Someone's deleting multiple VMs. Again, you can see impossible travel. This is a fun one. If someone were to log in with let's say they log in San Francisco, and then 3 hours later they log in Chennai, that it's impossible for them to have flown from San Francisco to Chennai. And so they actually have a math that's built into this that says, okay, are we getting logins in physical locations which are impossible to do? And of course, sometimes those are if someone's using a VPN, for example, that'll show up and give an alert. But you may have a policy that states that you don't want people to use VPNs in any case. All right. So again, to give you just kind of a brief idea of what it is that you can do with that platform. All right. I want to leave at least a few minutes here for questions. I know we've got about 6 minutes left here, and also wanted to point out the session code of this session is 77570. So I know that's valuable to the organizers, or they're organizing something to do with the session code. So I'm going to throw this up here. Also put my contact information. So if you want to reach out to me, contact me. You'll see my contacts. I have a travel blog. I haven't updated it for a while. But if you want to check out some of my travel stories, I've been to 175 countries around the world. There's 18 left. My 175th was visited in February 2020, and then of course everything shut down. If things go well, and if things aren't too crazy in the world, I'm hoping to add a few more later this year, and to be able to get back to traveling, because I do travel is kind of a passion of mine as well too, and I do plan on visiting all 193 countries in the world, but again, there's about 18 left, so I've got to get moving on that. I was supposed to be done in September 2021, or at least per my original plan. I travel a lot with another SharePoint MVP guy named Joel Olison, and he and I travel to a lot of the same countries, and we both had kind of a target date of hitting that in September 2021. We've both obviously been delayed in reaching our number, but if you have any questions about that as well, I'm happy to address them. So again, I also store slides on SlideShare, so if you go to slideshare.net, you can find the information up there. Are there any questions in the few minutes we have left?
Thank you, Michael. Everyone, you can unmute yourself and ask any questions you have for Michael. And Michael, before somebody asks you, 174 countries, are you in real life? That's amazing. When did you start traveling?
Well, I mean, actually, the funny thing is the first 17 years of my life, I had only really been to the U.S. and Canada. I grew up near the Canadian border, so I was in Canada a lot. But then I went to Japan at the age of 17, and I really liked it, but I didn't really have the opportunity until I started to work in IT significantly, and then that writing the books and things like that got me invited to events. And so I started to speak at events around the world, and again, really enjoy the meeting new cultures and new cuisines. I love all the different varieties of Indian food, incidentally, and yes, I can handle all of it. Yeah, without getting deli belly, right? Well, I mean, sometimes things get a little bit exciting down there, but in any case, I love different foods. I love meeting different people. I'm fascinated by languages. I speak a few languages as well too, Russian and a little bit of French. Started to learn Mandarin during the COVID lockdown. So yeah, I don't know. Just the travel has just been kind of a passion of mine, and it's been difficult being stuck in one place for so long. But I renewed my passports. I've got a brand new passport, and so I'm ready to go again once things start to get a little bit better.
Lovely, that's amazing. I have a question here on the chat here. One, do we have any API that gives Sentinel logs?
Yeah, actually, you can. There is an API for Sentinel logs, so you can tie in directly to that. You can expose it in various ways, but yes, you can do a lot of that via Sentinel. There's some native graphs. I don't have a Sentinel demo environment. Microsoft doesn't create one, and I can't obviously show you a real one, but I do recommend you take a look at some of the demo videos and stuff that Microsoft has created in terms of Sentinel, and you'll be able to see some of the stuff. But it does connect directly to the Graph API. Oh, and by the way, yeah, it's the CCO site. I think you have to go to www.cco.com. I should probably update that link. I noticed that the other day as well too. I think they changed to a different hosting provider, and for whatever reason they didn't update that. And Mauritius, actually, I have visited Mauritius. I just didn't speak there. I was in Mauritius. It was in 2017, I want to say. I'm just going through some of the questions that are there. And Mauritius is a beautiful place. Let's see. I'm looking if there's any other questions. Yeah, so integrating Sentinel, someone has a question, integrating Sentinel with a third-party SIEM. So I've never done that, but it absolutely could be done. There's connectors to be able to parse through the data, but I haven't done it with QRadar specifically, but it conceivably can be done, and Microsoft's made this so that the APIs into Sentinel are pretty standard, so you're not locked into any one thing. Okay. All right. Well, it is right at the top or the bottom of the hour, depending on where you're coming in from. So I will. I'll close this down, and I would say connect with me if you have any questions. Ping me on LinkedIn or what have you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have at that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for joining. Having you here, it was amazing session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and have a good rest of your weekend.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
And others, you can please join us on our next session. Please go to the website and see the agenda. Thank you. Bye-bye.